Is it live? Are we doing it? All right. Well, I was
What
going to.
does "Are you ready" mean to you?
I don't know.
It's still. It does not show me.
Do what?
Oh, yeah, all that stuff.
Thank you.
What? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Of course.
Are we gonna talk about?
Can I take a shot?
Shut. I like how he bends his knees into it. Why are you doing this while you're on camera?
Well, I have to have my wine.
We've been here for 3 minutes.
There's a lot going on. All right. Ow. Okay, now I'm on fire. Okay, let Daddy do his thing. All right. So, thank you everyone for joining us. It's a little confusing and chaotic here right now. It's just a little chaotic. Olivia, thank you. Thank you, Fang. Why don't you go hang out with Corey, who would love to hang out with Fang. Okay, all right, Fang. You do you. So I figured tonight, actually, somebody posted on my Facebook a while ago a thing about something to do with Vietnam, and it got me thinking about the fact that I want to talk about Vietnam. And in the classes that I teach, Vietnam always comes around at the very end of the semester, and it usually comes around in a position where it's kind of like time crunched. It's like I've got only a limited amount of time to talk about it before the semester's over, and I got to give everybody their final exam. So it's nice to kind of like have a little relaxing chat about Vietnam, right? So I kind of wanted to do that. As always, I want to thank our Patreon subscribers, Chris Lee, Karen Lee Duffel, and also what? And also, I want to give a shout out to our longtime friends of the show, Yiffy Winkler and Ori Winkler, who have supported us each time. Right, so that's we want to do that. And Olivia, can you take the leaf out of directly in front of me? Thank you so much. So let's talk about Vietnam War, right? Because we're here. And as always, if you're in the comments, be sure to chime in so that my executive producer can give you a shout out and we can say what's up. If you got a question or a comment, be sure to jump in too. Right. So, what can you say about Vietnam? It's the most significant event I think that a lot of people don't know a lot about in American history. It happened recently enough that it's like you can easily talk to people who lived through it or were affected by it. And at the same time, also, it falls into that kind of memory gap, that memory hole, where in a lot of people's history classes that take in like high school or whatever, it's too soon, right? The class ends, and it's not like a conspiracy. It's mostly like when I took American history as an undergraduate, we just ran out of semester, right? He literally didn't have time to tell us about anything that happened after World War II because we just don't have any more class, right? And that's a big choice you got to make. When I teach, I usually go a little faster in the 19th century so that I can cover stuff after World War II because I like to, right? But I mean, there's some people that really want to make sure people learn about the stuff after the Civil War, and as a consequence, you might not have enough time, right? And I think Vietnam is a really consequential event because for every American presidential election between 1964 and 2004, it was an issue, right? In 2004, the Massachusetts Senator John Kerry probably didn't get elected president because of some stuff he did or didn't do or said or didn't say during the Vietnam War. And the only reason it wasn't an issue in 2008 was that one guy was a POW who actually was in prison for most of the war, and as a consequence, you don't really want to bring it up and make him look good. And the other guy was a kid when Vietnam happened. And so, as a consequence, we kind of, for one guy, it aged out, and for the other guy, it was sort of, it was not a controversial thing, right? And so I think Vietnam is pretty important in that regard, right? It's also, I think, kind of fascinating to talk about. So the first thing we have to talk about, there's a couple things that we have to say. The first thing you understand is that we talk about Vietnam War, you're actually talking about the Vietnam Wars. It's multiple wars that for us seem different, but for the Vietnamese, I think, seem pretty folded together. In addition, you've got to understand that they were different things for different people, right? For the United States of America, the Vietnam War was about defending a country that we were allied with. It was about opposing the spread of communism. For the Vietnamese, I think the North Vietnamese in particular, it was always about nationalism, right? They were communists. They did garb themselves in the accoutrement of communism, and they did affect communism in Vietnam when it was united under their rule. But at the same time, they were as much nationalist as they were communist. And so for them, it was really the term that was very common in the late 20th century. It was a war of national liberation. It was about freeing themselves from these foreigners who had come to their country, right? Which I think is important to consider. All right. Okay, just thanks. So, do we have anybody hanging out?
Stephanie and Teresa and Mel.
Cool. All right, so.
We're live.
So what else can we say to sort of start it off here? I mean, you can also just comment with her words.
Right, but he made a face like what we're here, and I was happy with people who have commented.
Right. That's true. I mean, I do know that you're here because I can see with my eyes, so it's not the same as the comment thread. So the first thing you understand is that Vietnam was an independent country and has a very long and rich history that goes back over 1,000 years. During the Middle Ages, there was a big empire centered around what is modern-day Vietnam, called Dai Viet, Great Viet. And the capital was a city in central Vietnam, modern central Vietnam, called Hue. And so the Vietnamese have this rich sense of their own history and culture as an independent and very proud country, right? And so another thing we can mention is that she's got the phone there, so she's going to start watching YouTube. We're going to need to turn the volume down because it's going to just burn me up. I don't even know where the headphones are. Yeah, the dongle. Thanks, Apple. Thanks, Steve Jobs. Yeah. Just saying, Android phones don't have that problem. Android for the win. And so there's even a good story that always gets brought up in Vietnam history books about a rebellion in the early first century AD. It's like 39 AD or something, where the Chinese invaded Vietnam and attempted to turn it into a colony, and the two Vietnamese sisters, the Trung sisters, actually led a rebellion, and they got a bunch of elephants, and then they destroyed the Chinese army. And it's usually cited as the idea that like the Vietnamese are very proud and they're very independent and they're very sort of proud of their own history and culture. And you know that often comes up in the introduction to histories of the Vietnam War, is the idea that like, hey, we're just going to repeat this again. And the Vietnamese, there's like precedent for this, right? Like they already view this as a certain way. What's that? Okay. Yeah, there was.
I'll use an iPhone, but you
Who said that?
Aaron.
Aaron. Oh, Aaron Cope. Yeah. What did Aaron say?
He said, "Don't you use an iPhone now?"
Oh no, God no! I would never use an iPhone. I've never had one. I will never have one. I use an Android phone. So my executive producer Dara uses an iPhone.
Because they're superior.
Disagree strongly. One disagree strongly.
They are superior.
The one-
Ask the man with the Google phone.
Well, I mean, everybody knows Google phones are bad. So I'm sorry about that. That's just the way that it is. But the iPhone is obviously inferior to the Android phone. So we're just going to go ahead and.
All right. Well, we're not on tonight to talk about the.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we just got a lot of chaos here, and it's really kind of making me off my game. Okay, Olivia, do you want to get out from under the table?
Go up to the bedside. All right. Come on. Let's go build that cool fort. Let's go.
Oh my God, you so can. I'm sorry, everyone. There's some technical difficulties. A longtime friend of the show, Princess Aurora, is helping it out.
Corey hates our stairs.
It's true. It's true. It's true. Hopefully, she doesn't realize I just called her Sleeping Beauty. I'll get stabbed later. So anyway, what else can we say then? Well, in the 1870s, the French conquered Vietnam, and they did so in a way. It was sort of because everybody had colonies, right? I mean, it was just one of those things. You snapped up any piece of territory you could easily get in Asia, and the French, had a valuable industry exporting things like rubber from Vietnam. Until World War II, synthetic rubber was unknown, rubber from petroleum, and so you had to get it from the rubber tree. It was only in Brazil and in Vietnam and Southeast Asia you could get it. And so the big moment comes in World War II when the Japanese take over Vietnam. And the Japanese take over Vietnam, and their slogan, their empire they established, is called the Japanese East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere, which is a bullshit name for anything, right? And the second thing is the slogan they say is Asia for Asians. right? And so they pitch their whole empire, the Japanese do, as sort of like, hey, like we're brother Asians, we're going to help you out here, right? Like it's going to be us, you and me together against the white man, right? And that's the thing that most Asians can agree is like, okay, I'm interested in hearing about it. But it quickly becomes apparent. And when the Japanese say Asia for Asians, what they really mean is Asia for Japanese people and fuck you if you're different. Right? And so they rapidly set up a colonial regime that's as exploitative and rapacious as anyone ever has been anywhere. Right? And so, but the reason we care about this is that the Vietnamese people had been told by the French and had been given some reasonable evidence that would substantiate this wrongheaded claim that like the French and the Europeans are superior, right? And of course, if you were a Vietnamese person and you didn't swallow racism directly presented to you, the French still were able to say, "Look, well, we conquered your country, right? I mean, like we're running Vietnam. Vietnam isn't running France." And so there was this entire edifice of kind of white supremacy that the French colonial project in Vietnam was kind of based on, right? And at the same time, what the Japanese did is shatter it, right? What the Japanese did is obliterate this, right? And so after World War II, the Vietnamese nationalists who had been kind of revolting against the French and kind of building this sort of intellectual edifice of an independence movement, they sort of had this moment where they're like, you know, if the Japanese can beat the French, they're Asian, we're Asian, you know, we could as well, right? I mean, like, well, there's no reason why Vietnamese people couldn't beat French people. And to be totally fair, the French defeat at the hands of the Japanese was humiliating. I mean, it was just, they just basically collapsed. And of course, remember, the reason that it happened in 1941 the way that it did, 1941 and 2, was because the French had been crushed by the Germans in Europe, right? I mean, the French defeat at the hands of the Nazis in France in 1940 was what allowed the Japanese to defeat the French in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia so easily, right? But the Vietnamese sort of took notice about that and said, holy crap, you know, I mean, if the French could get folded up by these other Asians, there's no reason why we couldn't do the same thing, right? And so out of that moment, the modern Vietnamese nationalist movement was born, right? And the leader was a guy named Nguyen Tat Tran. He goes by, in the early 20th century, Nguyen Ai Quoc in Vietnamese, which means Nguyen the Patriot. You can also call him Nguyen. That's technically how you pronounce it, is Nguyen the Patriot. Later on, he goes by the nickname Ho Chi Minh, which means in Vietnamese like wise Uncle Ho or something like that. And so his real name, of course, was Nguyen Tat Tran. And so Mr. Nguyen was a student in Vietnam, and around the early 20th century, he actually he travels the world. He actually lived abroad in America for a brief period. He traveled to America and France. A lot of educated upper class Vietnamese people who were Catholic converted to Catholicism and traveled to France. And in fact, I know a Vietnamese family where their mother was educated at a boarding school in France, at a finishing school in France. Having said that, Nguyen Tat Tran shows up in 1919 and 1920 at the Versailles Conference after World War I. And President Woodrow Wilson, the American president at the time, is giving this big sort of song and dance about how countries should be free and colonialism is bad, and you know, self-determination is the order of the day. And at this point, Mr. Nguyen goes by Nguyen Ai Quoc, and so he shows up and says like, "Hey, what about self-determination for Vietnam, right? I mean, like, what about independence for Vietnam, my country?" And of course, the Allies who just won World War One, they scoff. I mean, they laugh. They're like, you know, not for self-determination is a penalty to be applied to the colonies of the loser. It's not something to be used against the victors in the war, France, right? And so Vietnam remains a French colony, and to a certain degree, I think Mr. Nguyen becomes deeply embittered by this experience, right? I mean, the words of the West ring hollow, and he begins a transformation that culminates in the 40s with him becoming a communist. And there's a lot of argument about this. Did he become a communist because he believed in the ideals? I think that he did believe in them. I think he saw them as a reasonable application of how to construct a human society. I think also it was a marriage of convenience. The communists were the only people in the world that actively supported the overthrow of colonial regimes. And so if you're a guy like Nguyen Ai Quoc, you say, who's going to help me but the Russians, right? And who will help a person like me? And there's evidence that during World War II, Ho Chi Minh, as he comes to be known, actually cooperated with the OSS, the World War II precursor to the CIA. And yet, at the same time, you know, when push came to shove, when the money was on the table, he said, "Help me overthrow France in Vietnam in 1945," and America under President Truman says no. And the answer is really clear. It's 1945. The Cold War is beginning. We really need allies against the Russians. France is one of our most important allies. We hope to get into the future NATO in a couple of years. And so we're not about to piss France off by saying that we're going to support a rebellion against its colonial rule in Vietnam. Right? That's just not a thing that we're necessarily prepared to do. Right, and so I think if you're Ho Chi Minh at that point, you say, "Look, I got to get the help where I can get the help." Right? I mean, the Americans are going to help me; the Russians will do it, and the Russians are only too glad. Right? And provide aid and comfort to someone who could weaken and threaten one of their presumed rivals or foes. Right? And so what happens in 1945 is that Ho Chi Minh begins a rebellion against the French. And actually, when the surrender of the Japanese is announced in August, he actually gives a speech in Hanoi in northern Vietnam. Where he proclaims the formation of an independent Vietnamese republic. And he quotes liberally from the Declaration of Independence of the United States of America in so doing, right? An educated guy, right?
Sorry.
Is there excitement in the comments? Oh, an Amber Alert.
It looks like it's in Orange County.
Oh, so, yeah, I'm surprised I didn't get that yet. Yeah. I'll get it in a little bit. So, and so Ho Chi Minh establishes this independence, this boom, it's working out pretty great. There we go. Got it. And you know what? It wasn't loud and annoying like it was with you guys, so that's cool.
Oh, you mean alerting somebody to an emergency?
Oh, I mean, it alerted me. It alerted me, but it didn't interrupt me. So I got a nice little vibrate in there because my boys got my back.
That was, yeah.
What? That's fine. Everything's fine. So having said that, the French pretty quickly announced their intention to sort of say no to this. I mean, they're in a position where, having lost very much in World War II, including basically their soul, having many Frenchmen collaborated with the Nazis to a degree that was very upsetting for the narrative of the French having this glorious resistance to Nazi rule, right? And the one really effective resistance to the Nazis in France was the Maquis, operated by the French communists. So, I mean, the whole post-war, French nationalism took a real big hit in those years. And so the French presidency, the French government announced that they were going to have to fight the Vietnamese. They were not going to just let Vietnam become independent. And so Ho Chi Minh began a military campaign, right? He founded a political party, the Viet Nam Quoc Doc Dong, and the VNQDD. And they, in turn, founded a guerrilla army called the Viet Minh. And the Viet Minh were going to overthrow French rule in Vietnam by main force. Right? And his right-hand man in this was a former teacher named Vo Nguyen Giap. Right? If you want to be, his name is Giap, G-I-A-P, but it's pronounced in Vietnamese with a Giap. G has a little bit of Z in it. And so if you want to sound like you're talking about it, you call him Giap. Giap is arguably one of the most effective and skilled strategists and leaders in the military sphere of the 20th century, a real visionary who had a concrete idea of how the under-equipped and underarmed Viet Minh could fight the French by adopting the strategy used by Mao Zedong in China against the nationalist Chinese government, this sort of guerrilla warfare strategy. When the enemy attacks, retreat. When the enemy retreats, attack. And then always sort of keep up the pressure. And what Giap realized was what Mao argued is that guerrilla war is about political circumstances, right? If you fight a war against your opponent militarily and you lose, you've lost. But if you fight a guerrilla war in a political way, your opponent will lose if you can convince him he cannot win, right? I mean, if the French government can spend years and years fighting the Viet Minh and never win, and never appear to win, and never appear to be winning, then they will realize they can't win and give up. And you can win a war politically without ever having won it militarily, right? And so the eminent American statesman and problematically difficult war criminal-esque figure, Henry Kissinger, famously said, in a guerrilla war, a conventional army loses until it wins, but a guerrilla army wins until it loses, right? And he knew what he was talking about, right? And so what can we say about the Franco-Vietnam War? Let's say for about 10 years. Fighting picked up in the late 40s and it ended in the mid 50s. And what eventually happened is the French simply were outmatched. The Viet Minh commanded the loyalty and respect of most of the the Vietnamese population, although it revealed an ugly split between upper class, very French-ified Vietnamese who spoke French and were educated in France and were wealthy landowners, where many of them were Catholic, and the vast majority of the Vietnamese who were very poor, spoke Vietnamese, were Buddhist, and sort of associated with the resistance movement. And the French also just simply vastly underestimated the capacities of their opponents. They constructed roads all over the country and forts along the roads, and the Viet Minh would simply leave them alone and then at night raid them. Right, and there was a whole road out of Hanoi. It was the road from Hanoi to Haiphong, I think, where the French soldiers called it the street without joy, because during the day the French controlled it, and as soon as the sun went down, the Viet Minh would come out of the woods and would set mines and traps and attack things and blow stuff up, and then the sun would come up and the Viet Minh would retreat. Right? These are comments or anything? Okay. And so what happened? Well, by the mid 50s, the French were desperate. They were asking American President Eisenhower for aid. They were pitching it in terms of increased cooperation with NATO and Europe in terms of, and we gave them money, and we gave them weapons, and we gave them all sorts of resources. And then finally, in northwestern Vietnam, the French decided to really go after what they saw as the stronghold of the Viet Minh. They built a base deep in the jungle in a very beautiful valley, and the base was in a little village called Dien Bien Phu. And the idea they had was they'd build this base, and they would clear the valley, and they would paratroop in all their soldiers. They would drop all the supplies in, and the Viet Minh wouldn't be able to do anything about it. They would keep this open by planes coming in, and then they would use the base as a sort of a place where they could send these groups of paratroopers into the jungle to attack the Viet Minh, and they would defeat them. And when one of the French commanders was asked by a reporter, the mountains at the edge of the valley are within the artillery range of the base. Surely that presents a problem. The French commander said the Vietnamese aren't going to be able to get artillery up on the mountains. They're short. They're small. They're not very strong. Right. And so Giap knew that this was a showdown. He was being offered a chance to prove to the world that the Viet Minh could go toe to toe with the French army and win. And not only that, the French had given him incredible circumstances in which to conduct this sort of experiment. And so what Giap did is he took the artillery pieces that he had. Some of them were 155 millimeter howitzers. And if you have watched our lecture about the Korean War, you will know that these 155 millimeter howitzers were the property of the 1st U.S. Cavalry Division, which were captured by North Koreans in 1950 in the winter during the opening days of the Korean War. And they were given by the Koreans to the Chinese, who gave them to the Vietnamese. And what Ho Chi Minh what Giap did is he had his men disassemble them. They took them apart. And the Vietnamese guys carried them a piece at a time up the mountains and then reassembled them and then rebuilt them on top of the hills. And so the first day that the French dropped troops into Dien Bien Phu and they set up their base, the Vietnamese started a punishing artillery fire. They blew up everything. They blew up the airfield. They blew up all of this. They blew up the hospitals and everything, and it was just punishing. There's rarely, at such times, has hubris been illustrated so clearly. I mean, the French were just like, look, the Vietnamese are a bunch of little jungle dirt farmers. How the hell are they going to do anything to us? And I mean, Giap did what any reasonable commander would do. He brought it. Right, and the French just didn't think it was. They had no conception that was even a thing they had to worry about. Right, and I mean, there you go. And supposedly the outposts at Dien Bien Phu were labeled with female names, and I want to say the general in charge was General de Latte de Tassigny, I think, is de Latte, and they were named after women, Gabrielle and Eloise and whatever, and they're supposed to be his mistresses, right? And the Vietnamese took them one at a time at night. And so, the sun would go down, the radio contact would be, his position Gabriel's fine, and then the next morning, there would be no contact all night long, and in the morning, you'd wake up and there'd be just a cloud of smoke, and the Vietnamese would have occupied this one, and then this one, and then this one, inching closer, and the artillery was constant, right? And it was really just sort of grim stuff. It was really grim. And in the end, the French begged us for help. They begged and begged and begged, and Eisenhower was reluctant to commit. He said, he said, this is a loser. I can't want to get involved. But also at the same time, he said, we can't send ground troops to Asia 3 times in 15 years, right? I mean, World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. Olivia, let's just eat something. I mean, how do you know that? I'm sorry. I'm just gonna.
Totally still see you, so that was completely pointless.
What? Oh.
Gorilla
You could
style.
just stand up and get it. It's fine. There's two. There's there's the shark and there's also the Anakin's lightsaber. That's fine.
I just haven't removed them. I can feel it.
Yeah, no, it's fine. You're fine. Hey, girls, can we? You want to have a fight about it? Well, then maybe you could leave the kitchen. Well, maybe you should eat this dinner we got for you. Sarah. All right. Exciting audience participation, y'all.
Sarah wants to know if she falls her nicely with mine.
Who is that, Sarah? Who? Oh yeah, what's up? Got my cheese balls. Where did I get them? You might ask. Where did I get these cheese balls? Total Wine. Total Wine. Mm.
Wait, here, throw, and I'll just throw them at you.
We were at the teppanyaki place one time, and the guy's like, "You want me to throw the shrimp?" And this one drunk dude at the table is like, "Oh yeah."
Don't choke on a cheese ball.
That's what's happening.
I'm going to mute you for a second.
I don't
Sarah,
want
no.
everybody to hear the sounds of you choking on cheese ball.
Yeah. That's what happened. I got it in my throat.
Well, you
That's what
talk.
she said.
That's what happens when you talk with your mouth full. You better?
Yeah. And so the drunk guy's like, yeah, totally. And the guy's like, okay.
And the drunk guy just like sits there with his mouth open, and the guy like throws the shrimp at him, and the guy doesn't move.
Not
You know, you kind of like move. He just like, and it hits him in the face, and he gets super mad and eat the French fry. I don't want it. Yeah, and the chef was kind of like, the guy's like, do it again, and the chef was like, okay, and he's like he's like, ready, and he throws it, and the guy's just like, hits him in the face, and the guy was like really, really mad, and so I think it was my dad was like, okay, kind of like.
You, me, and Andrew and Holly.
Yeah, so we were all like, oh, okay, like whatever, like, yes. I don't want a French fry. Just put it on the table. I'll get it later. Thanks. So, in answer to your question, Sarah, the cheese balls pair beautifully with the wine. You just don't want to inhale them. You just don't want to inhale them because they don't go so great in your lungs. Okay. Yeah.
It's aged deliciously.
2020.
No, 2020 is a terrible year.
What? It's fine.
I apologize to all the people who really can't stand the sound of chewing. As Matt eats cheese balls while microphone.
Because cheese balls the hardware store.
Total Wine, baby. I bought a bunch of beer. One time I went in and bought Dara like a bunch of little liquor bottles. And I bought like $200 of little liquor bottles and then the cheese balls. And the lady was like, I don't even, like whatever, you do you.
They were for gift basket.
Fire truck, baby.
All right, Vietnam.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. Okay. So it was double the ambulance and the fire truck.
My mom just said, put down your balls and get back to the story.
Can you quit playing your balls?
No. Can you sit? All right, so what happens is that a peace treaty is brokered between the Viet Minh, the existing Vietnamese government, the French, and the Americans, and it's called the Geneva Accords. And the treaty basically is that we're going to divide Vietnam in half, and that the southern half is going to be run by the French-backed government, which will shortly become the American-backed government. Right, the French will just sort of exit at this point, and then the and the north will be run by the Viet Minh. who of course will institute a Stalinist dictatorship in North Vietnam. And within, I think, 5 years, they will have elections, and whichever side, basically the elections will be a national referendum. Do you want North Vietnam to take over South Vietnam, or would you like South Vietnam to take over North Vietnam, right? And it becomes pretty obvious in those. There's a huge flow of people back and forth. A lot of North Vietnamese flee south because they hate communism. A significant number of communist spies go with them. A lot of nationalist South Vietnamese flee north because they support the nationalist government and they want to, take part in the experiment. And in the north, by the way, there is a Stalinist dictatorship. I mean, Ho Chi Minh purges the government of people it doesn't like, and they shoot people and all that stuff, right? And by the 60s, it quickly becomes obvious that the election is going to be an election between the American-backed nationalist South Vietnamese guy who nobody likes and everybody knows is a foreign puppet. His name is Diem. His name is No Din Diem. And he's educated in France. He's this sort of weird Catholic guy. He's this sort of obscure philosophical fellow. He's super corrupt. And over the course of the late 50s, his family has emerged as sort of like he's put them in positions of power. His wife, Madame New, runs a bunch of stuff. His brother is the Archbishop of Saigon, a head Catholic in the country. And as a consequence, sort of everybody in Vietnam views him as basically a stooge of the French and later the Americans, right? And the other guy running for leader of Vietnam in these elections that we're supposed to have is Ho Chi Minh, right? I mean, Nguyen Tat Tra, aka Nguyen Ai Quoc, right? And one American says it's sort of like if Diem, who is a vaguely corrupt, stoogey kind of criminal-esque dude, is running for president against a guy who is the combination of Jesus and Santa Claus, right? Because I mean, Ho Chi Minh spends the ensuing years living in the jungle, eating a bowl of rice every day, wearing sandals made out of old rubber tires, sacrificing his personal safety and comfort in order to, support the movement, plotting in order to try to recover, in Vietnamese independence and stuff. And so, I mean, there's no way he could compete against this guy, right? I mean, the Vietnamese view him as a national hero. Even Vietnamese people who are legitimately not communist still argue that Ho Chi Minh might be a communist, but like at least he's Vietnamese, right? I mean, at least he's a person from their country. And it is obvious that his rule would mean independence, as opposed to Diem, who would presumably mean, essentially being a colony or a satrapy of the Americans who've taken over from the French, right? So the situation is pretty straightforward. In the 1960s, we just don't allow the elections to happen. I mean, there's just, it's one of those things where if an election's optional and you're going to lose, you just don't do it, right? And so the North Vietnamese until 1975 argue that their primary casus belli in the Vietnam War is that they simply, they want these elections to happen, right? They view the Americans as having violated this agreement, right? And so, having said that, the Kennedy administration kind of, hey, Sarah, can you be a little more quiet? Thank you. Just a little bit. I love the specificity. At least she agreed. Olivia would have been like, no. And so the Kennedy administration kind of kicks the Vietnam can down the road. They avoid making a lot of serious decisions, although what Kennedy does is he sets the United States up for greater involvement by sending advisors, right? And so rather than making any serious decision about like, should we commit to supporting Vietnam or should we withdraw and let the issues be as they are, he does nothing except he gradually sort of increases our involvement, right? He sends advisors, some of whom begin to fight alongside the South Vietnamese military. As the North Vietnamese, we should mention, they spend the 50s kind of building up their strength and kind of setting the situation up. And by about 1960, they're ready to kind of turn the heat up on the South. And they begin to support an insurgency against the South Vietnamese government after the failure of the Geneva elections to happen, right? And so the insurgency initially is about 50% native South Vietnamese who don't like communism but don't like the government, and about 50% pro-communist people backed by the North. And the North begins to covertly move men and weapons and supplies down through an increasingly complex series of trails that veer sometimes into Laos and Cambodia called the Ho Chi Minh Trail, right? And so they veer southwest, south, and then southeast into South Vietnam. And so this kind of multifaceted kind of hydra of an insurgency breaks out, whereby the South Vietnamese government finds itself kind of on the defensive. Yeah, you're gonna need it to be a little quieter, Olivia. I'm gonna die. I'm gonna go to hell, and it's gonna be kid YouTube videos.
Loves him.
Yeah, you love Tim now. Later tonight, you're gonna come in. You're gonna sleep on top of me, so I understand how it is. And then puke on my foot, and then puke on my pants, and then puke on the floor. It was super. It was the grossest thing I've ever seen. It was. Oh, she's been trying. It was super gross. You're the gross. I'm talking to you. Go ahead and lick his feet. That's fine. Normally, you lick my feet, but I'm not around, so whatever. It's fine. She doesn't care.
Sorry, Stephanie just said kids' YouTube sounds awful.
It's worse than
Yeah. Yeah.
It's so much worse.
Kids YouTube. It's like puppy dog pals forever. Just forever.
Yeah, we're talking to the kids in chat about the licking of the feet.
Oh, it's Isabella.
Can't we both?
It's YouTube Kids. Thank you. Yeah, no, it's Kids YouTube is 100 million times worse. And yeah, Isabella of Castillo likes to lick my feet. So, and puke on the feet. She's got a foot thing, because if you believe your shoes, she used to sleep on our shoes. If you leave your shoes on the floor, she would sleep on top of them. And she would stick her face in Dara's shoes and smell Dara's feet. I'm just trying to fill people in. This is important. Hey, come here. And so, fine, go away then. That's cool. I don't even like you. I'm just kidding. I love you. So, over the course of the early 60s, the Kennedy administration doesn't really make a firm. I mean, like we're going to support the South Vietnamese government, but we're not going to like send troops or anything. And we're just content to kind of, the South Vietnamese can fight this insurgency. They can kind of do it. But we send advisors, and it's one of those things where it's like, you dip your toe in, and then it doesn't seem so bad to do the other toes, and then the foot and your ankle, and now you're swimming. And that's basically what happens. I mean, some of these guys, the earliest names in the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C., date from this period when some of these guys die. They die fighting the South Vietnamese government, and or die fighting the insurgency. And the South Vietnamese government rapidly is sort of revealed by people in the know to not be serious about. Yeah, it's right there.
Yes, you reset my Alexa light.
Alexa, turn off Spotlight. Cool.
Okay. We're having issues with a lot of them since the power outage last week.
Yeah, they need to be reset. And so the South Vietnamese government doesn't actually want to fight the soldiers in the army and stuff. They view the insurgency. A lot of people think it's fundamentally legit, right? If you're the average South Vietnamese guy, you look at your government and it's this corrupt, cronyist government that seems to care about getting rich, and you think why am I fighting for these people? You might not be a communist, but you're not exactly about to go catch a bullet because your boss is taking your salary, kickbacks or something, and it becomes apparent to a lot of the Americans who were in the know in those days that the South Vietnamese government is just simply the army is structured more than anything else to protect the rulership of South Vietnam as opposed to actually fight communists. And we're bankrolling these guys. We're sending them millions of dollars a year. We're sending them weapons and trainers and advisors and tanks and all this stuff. And the main purpose of the South Vietnamese army is called the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, and the shorthand is ARVN. The main purpose of the ARVN is to keep the Diem family in power. It's not really about fighting communism. It's not really about fighting communism at all, right? And so I'm going to have to turn off the strobe lights. It's really bothering me.
Yeah, I think
Is it? I got to remember which switch it is. There we go. No, it's fine. I'm just going to finish this wine and then have a shot. What?
you'll fall asleep.
Getting yelled at by my kid now. Jeez. When did she turn into a teetotaler? So there's a number of Americans that are sort of the know. There's the American Army officer John Paul Van, who it was a good book about him called John Paul Van and American Vietnam: A Bright and Shining Lie. And he fights in a battle of the hamlet of Bach, which is like 1962 or something. And the South Vietnamese army is in a perfect position. The ARVN is in a perfect position to dispense with the North Vietnamese guerrillas and the South Vietnamese insurgents that are there. And they don't go into battle. They refuse to fight. And he finally realizes that the colonel in charge of the army was specifically ordered not to risk his men in a confrontation with the guerrillas because their main purpose is to stay alive and protect Diem, right? And Colonel Edward Lansdale, the head of the CIA mission in Saigon, has the same realization that the Americans are never going to be able to win the Vietnam conflict as it exists because the South Vietnamese government simply doesn't care, right? And Diem himself is incredibly unpopular. Right, he spends the time in the '60s in 1961 and '3 picking fights with everybody. There are protests in Hue and in Quang Tri province about his repression of Buddhists, which culminated in an American photographer being informed to come to a public square where he shows up only to witness a Buddhist monk immolating himself, dumping gasoline on himself, and setting himself on fire in protest of Diem's repression. And of course, I don't know if there's a video, but there's footage of it, pictures of it. It's a world famous photograph. I mean, Vietnam. I don't know. I wonder. I don't know if there's a film of the burning monk. No, it's probably not. The Vietnamese government this is great. They probably love it. I know there's a picture. I don't know if there's film. I'd have to Google if there's film. They have his car, actually, the pagoda where he lived as the monk. The car where he siphoned the gas. They have. You can go see it. It's in a little museum they have. And they know his name. His name is Duke something. I don't remember. But the American photographer, they sort of tell him like, oh, hey, you kind of want to be in like whatever square at like 10 a.m. or whatever. And he's like, why? And they're like, just, well, whatever. And he shows up and he sees this guy totally silently douse himself in gas and then rip a match and drop it into his lap. Say it again.
I might not be saying this right at all.
Spell his name. THIC.
THICH.
Teak. And then what's the middle name? Quan. QUA. Quang. And then Duc. DUCH. Yeah. DUC. Yeah. Quick Ton Duc. He's the guy that set himself fire. There's picture.
There are lots of pictures.
Yeah, there's a bunch of pictures of it.
They're graphic.
They are very graphic. And of course, this raises a lot of questions. Like, people are willing to do this to protest their religious freedom against the guy who's like our buddy, right? And so, to make a long story short, in the mid '60s, a group of Vietnamese generals in 1963 in the summer, they come to this realization of like, we have a weapon we can use against Diem. Diem is kind of a dipshit. He's kind of a can you scoop Fang up and bring him down? Corey's like, I'll do it. I love Fang. And so, but Fang knows he can't get down the stairs because he's old, so he will scratch. And so, the generals realize, Olivia, please don't adjust the camera. Thank you. They realize that they could. A weapon they can use against Diem is that he's not prosecuting the war against the communists very effectively. So they kind of approach the Kennedy administration and they sort of say like, hey, like, what if Diem had an accident, right? Like, what if he was not around? And if you were willing to say that that's okay for that situation to happen, then we would be willing to promise to fight communism like a lot more, right? Like we would be. Hey, watch out. Thank you.
I mean, I can make her a cup of mac and cheese, but it'll take like 4 minutes.
We've got a mac and cheese scenario playing out right now.
I mean, I can make you an easy mac. Daddy will go get it. Yeah, but you're leaving that package anyway, so. No, there's 2 packages back there. Is there? Yeah. Okay. So make sure. I ordered a boatload of them. Dude, the breadsticks are awesome.
Yeah.
All right, so.
Sorry, I was having a shot. A while ago. I want to finish my wine. You want some more wine? You got wine? I'm just have a lot. It's heresy. It's not coffee. Who is that, Sarah Knight?
Yeah.
No, Sarah, it's not coffee creamer. It's that Dara made me a bunch of cocktails with creamer last week, with Irish cream, creme de menthe or something.
Creme de menthe and white chocolate liqueur and milk.
And we had it in the mixer, in the mixing thing in the fridge, and Dara finished this creamer, so we just repurposed this as a cocktail storage device, right? And so we're just having shots of that.
Reduce, recycle.
No, it's just because that we wanted to wash the cocktail thing. What's up? Thumbs up. I'm feeling good. If Olivia,
She's adjusting your angles.
I appreciate it. Thanks, camera lady. Fang's got to go out. If we could just put all of the kids and animals in a catapult, fling them into the lake, that would be fine.
It would not work.
Yeah, they swim. I know you wouldn't like. You swim. You're fine.
Yeah, the fun fertilizer lake.
Whatever. Make them tough. So. I'll give you a floaty. She got poop in the butt? A little bit. Got poop in the butt. A little bit. Oh, yeah. Okay. All right, so what happens is the generals sort of make it known to Kennedy, and they think that they're being oblique, but it's like, they kind of like, we get it, right? And what actually happens is that Kennedy displays a sort of shocking naivete and is like, yeah, whatever, okay. And so, or probably like, yeah, whatever, or whatever BS fake Massachusetts accent he uses. And what happens in the summer of 1963 is that the generals, they stage a coup. They overthrow Diem. They pack his wife off to Paris. They kill his brother, I think, and they put him under house arrest. And that eventually they put him on an APC. Then they're going to take him on a ride to the airport. And I just want to let you know, just as a general rule of thumb, when the generals put you in an APC for a ride to the airport, that's not where you're going, right? And what they do is they put him in the back of this APC and they drive him out to the airport. And about halfway there, they pull off onto a side road. They open the back of the APC and they fill it full of hot lead. And they just kill him. They just shoot him. And they send Kennedy a picture. They're like, "Look, we're for real. Here's the proof. This is what we said, right?" And Kennedy apparently is horrified. There's this picture of Diem's bullet-riddled corpse in the back of an APC, and Kennedy's like, "Holy shit!" And his advisors are like, "The fuck do you think these guys were saying, right?" I mean, like, they weren't going to take Diem and give him like a goodie bag and put him on the armored personnel carrier. It's an armored vehicle with usually tracks in order to carry infantry into combat with a machine gun and stuff. The American one was, I think, the M113, I think, was a boxy looking thing. It's like a tank, but instead of a cannon, it has like place for soldiers to be. Right? And so his advisors were like, dude, JFK, bro, what did you think they were saying? When someone says they're going to give you a ride to the airport, it doesn't mean it's like not an Uber to the airport. It means they're going to shoot you, right? And that's what happened. And the Vietnamese government, the South Vietnamese government, becomes this sort of increasingly unstable military dictatorship over the next decade. It flops around between a bunch of different guys, Du Quan Minh and Nguyen Cao Kai, and these guys who were these sort of like, Nguyen Cao Kai is a former Air Force officer who goes around in a flight suit, and his wife has a Jackie Kennedy haircut. She's this nice-looking Vietnamese lady with the swoop hair, and they all wear white flight suits. She was a pilot too, and they wear the big white scarves and stuff. And it's like this weird. They're like, look at us, we're the first couple of Vietnam, and it's like it's a weird, like they're pilots and stuff. And so I guess she gets the Jackie Kennedy haircut under a helmet or something to fly. I don't know. And so it becomes increasingly difficult for the Americans to argue that they're supporting democracy in South Vietnam, because it's not. But we're going to say it anyway, right? And so a few months later, Kennedy himself gets assassinated, right? He goes to Texas to shore up support among Southern Democrats after the passage of after debate around the Civil Rights Act and the increasingly acrimonious, contentious civil rights movement that's brewing in the American South. The Mississippi fight over the admission of James Meredith to University of Mississippi, and the Freedom Riders in in the South, the kids who go to test bus integration, and the Montgomery bus boycott and the Birmingham street protests and the Greensboro protests. And so Kennedy realizes he's got a kind of weakness with Southern Democrats. So he goes to Texas, and it's in Dealey Square, Dealey Plaza in November 22nd, that he's shot, right? And so the government passes to his vice president, Lyndon Johnson. And Johnson doesn't want to do anything about Vietnam for two reasons. You don't want to make a mess of things while you're waiting to get reelected, right? Hey, Olivia, can you go see if Fang wants to come in? Cool, thanks. And also, you Johnson doesn't really care about Vietnam. For him, it's this sort of total distraction, right? His goal is to remake American society, a la his idol Franklin Roosevelt had done in the 30s with the New Deal, right? He's got this ambitious idea to unleash the power of the government to help Americans. Just hang the menorah in front of it. Thank you. No, it'll be fine. And he wants to remake to unleash the power of the government and to remake American society, a la the New Deal. And of course, Vietnam is simply a distraction from that, right? And so Johnson holds off until the summer of 1964 when the re-election campaign is really in full swing. And that's when he's given this sort of gift, right? The South Vietnamese army, the ARVN, is running a series of commando raids into North Vietnam. Along the border. They're called Ops Plan 34A raids, which is a weirdly specific thing, I know. And what they do is the American destroyer will sit off the coast in North Vietnamese waters and give them kind of like anti-aircraft and like radar support and everything. And these South Vietnamese commandos will get in like a speedboat and they'll go up into North Vietnam and they'll like blow some shit up. They'll just wreck something and then they'll get back in the boat and go away. And in one of these, it's like in August of 1964, and one of these raids goes bad. The North Vietnamese they're watching this shit happen. They finally have had enough, and so they start firing at the American destroyer. The destroyer in question is the Lester Maddox, and the Lester Maddox is like sitting there off the coast, and these South Vietnamese commandos get away, and the South Vietnamese commandos get away. And the North Vietnamese decide to just go after the freaking Lester Maddox. And so they send a couple speedboats, they shoot some stuff at it. It's a nothing thing. I mean, nothing really happens. But on the other hand, the Johnson administration uses this as a justification to go to Congress and ask for a greater kind of not a declaration of war, but a sort of a recognition of the situation, right? And they get a resolution out of Congress called the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution. It's like August of 1964. And the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution basically says that the American government can use force in Southeast Asia as long as it deems necessary, to whatever extent it deems necessary, to protect democracy for as long as it feels it's threatened. And so basically, Johnson can do what he wants as long as he wants, as long as he feels South Vietnamese democracy is under threat, which of course is you're defending a thing that doesn't even really exist, right? But whatever, right? And so, look, we got a mac and cheese delivery for you, so I'm excited. It's like happy grilled cheese, but on a plate. Does she need like a fork or whatever? Happy mac and cheese is right. Say, Sarah, it's right there. It's literally right there. She's just excited. If I drink enough shots, I don't end up caring about anything that goes on. So that's.
Hasn't been hungover that badly yet.
Yeah.
I mean, the first time I did, it was a whole bottle and a half of wine. So I was feeling it. I know you were feeling it. Yeah. Woo! It was real. I spent an hour trying not to throw up in the bed, so that was cool.
Oh, I did throw up, but
You did. I should have gone.
it makes you feel a lot better. I slept like a baby.
What is up?
He wants his-
You want a cookie? You want a cookie? Okay. Give him a cookie. Okay, we'll give him a cookie. Here, Olivia, come here. We're gonna give him a cookie. Okay, give him one of these. Give him a cookie. Go Fing cookie. Fing. It's a little heart, yeah. Let me take the bumper off. Okay. And so But just watch out. And so, go hang out with your friend Corey. Go hang out with Corey.
Because she's not on the couch.
Yeah, Tim is on the couch. Go hang out with your friend Tim. Okay. Having said that, the Gulf of Tonkin resolution is basically like a blank check. Johnson famously said that the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, he said it was like grandma's nightshirt. You could stretch it to cover anything you wanted, which is like not the most profane Lyndon Johnson joke that I could utter in this instance. But I mean, we got kids and stuff, so.
Because that stopped you?
Well, I mean, one time he was. He used to call his penis jumbo.
Yes, we've mentioned that in like 6
Oh, we
lectures
did talk
now.
about that. Yeah, I forgot. Yeah, look, it's look, this is a penis heavy thing. We had to talk about Rasputin and his clit stimulating wart on his penis. I mean, that was for real.
Why does it always come down to penises for you?
It's just history. It's where history takes us. So,
Maybe we should change that.
well, I mean, I don't know where it's going to go in the future. Maybe it's a giant vagina, but in the past, it was a big penis.
Okay, well now you got the girls snorting, so let's get back to Vietnam.
Sarah, go eat your mac and cheese. Your dad made you the mac and Olivia, can you just sit down and chill out, or are you done watching your phone? Then turn it off. Okay, thank you. I already gave you a treat. Dang. All right, do we have any comments?
I mean, people commenting that they heard the various noises going on around their house.
Olivia, Daddy's trying to record, so do you think you can maybe just calm down a little bit? Okay, thank you, appreciate it. So, having said that, Johnson doesn't do anything about the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. He puts it in his back pocket. The election in 1964 happens. He thinks he's going to run against New York Governor Nelson Rockefeller, but Rockefeller goes to the Republican convention in San Francisco. It's, by the way, in a building called the Cow Palace, which was built by the New Deal, which is and Rockefeller gets up on the stage, and the fans, the partisans of, just leave it, Sarah Fang will get it. The partisans of a conservative right-wing kind of revival in the Republican Party, they stage a floor fight at the convention. And when Rockefeller takes the stage, they just scream and shout until their candidate is acclaimed by a floor vote. Arizona Senator Barry Goldwater. And Goldwater gets up on the stage and he says, and I want to make sure I get it right because I had a couple shots. He says, extremism in defense of liberty is no vice, and moderation is no virtue. And I mean, he just brings the house down. This is conservatives for years have been saying that the choice in Republican politicians has been between a Democratic liberal and a Republican basically liberal. And the conservative activist Phyllis Schlafly, not my favorite person ever, but she wrote a book called A Choice, Not an Echo. She said, I want a choice between a liberal and a conservative, not a liberal and a liberal echo, right? I mean, not a liberal and a liberal. And they got it. They got Goldwater. Goldwater campaigned against the civil rights movement in the South, alienating black voters. He campaigned in the North, too. He campaigned against the war on poverty in the poorest part of the United States of America. He went to the poorest county in the poorest state in West Virginia and said, I don't think the government should fight poverty. And everyone was like, and he went to an audience of old people, the AARP, and he said he didn't think the government should have Social Security. And of course, the old people are like, cool, thanks for telling us to vote for Johnson. And Goldwater got, to put it bluntly, he got fucking slaughtered. Right? He got his ass crushed in 1964. Johnson got every state except 5. He got, Goldwater got Arizona, his home state. But in an ominous trend for the future, for the first time in living memory, Republicans picked up 4 southern states. I want to say it was Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and like maybe Louisiana or something like that. It might have been South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi. And it was thought that those were reliable Democratic strongholds, right? And of course, Goldwater had appealed to Southern conservatives' distaste for the federal government and of course support for segregation by presenting them with a viable alternative, and they pushed for him, and it was a foretaste of what was to come, right? And so I don't like George Will because he's a jackass, but he said in 1980, he said, Goldwater finally won. It just took until 1980 when Ronald Reagan getting elected for it to happen. And you could write a really good book about how Goldwater went from being a fringe candidate in 64 to the nominee in 1980 in the form of Ronald Reagan. And I should mention, you don't have to write that book because Rick Perlstein wrote 4 of them. And you can go look them up. It's called Before the Storm, Nixon Land, The Invisible Bridge, and Reagan Land. And you can read all of them and understand how we went from Goldwater being a weirdo in 1964 to Reagan being a landslide victor in 1980, right? But anyway, Johnson has achieved his victory. He's president again. All it took was the Republicans nominating a wacko, Johnson stage managing the Atlantic City Democratic Convention, and everything coming together, and he gets to be president. And so Johnson doesn't give a shit about Vietnam. He said famously, Vietnam is like my wife. I hate her, but I can't get rid of her. The Great Society is like my mistress. I love her. I can't get enough of her, but I got to stay with my damn wife. Right? And so Johnson, though, to appease what he thinks is the sentiment in America, he escalates the Vietnam War, right? He doesn't think he has any choice. He can't pursue his objectives and ignore the idea of a communist country, right? And you got to understand, if Johnson had you got there's little packages.
There. Oh, that one's closed. There. It's the one that's by the door now.
Yeah.
One by the door now. That one's open.
Come on. Why? No. Do you want a cheese ball? Why are you gonna mess with my cheese balls? I know I said it didn't bother me, but that was like 20 minutes ago. Can you walk out of the way, please? Come on. Oh my gosh. And you basically tell him that for every hour he babysits, he gets 5 minutes on the Xbox, and that'll solve your problems.
No, you have to increase the portion there. For every minute he babysits, he gets 5 minutes later on the Xbox. Sarah! Go sit with Daddy. All right, so.
Anyway, so Johnson escalates the Vietnam War. In 1964, he sends in the Marines, and it's this slippery slope where we send in the Marines. Well, first we start. The South Vietnamese are bombing North Vietnam, and Johnson gets this idea that we bomb them and they will stop supporting the South Vietnamese insurgency, and that will allow the South Vietnamese to clean it up. Right? It's this sort of, you're bombing the North Vietnamese to deter them, and then of course the bombing. We're going to take over the bombing. We're going to help them bomb. And then you send in Marines to guard the bombers. And then it's the slippery slope where you send in the Marines to guard the bombers, but then the Marines can't just guard the bases. They've got to patrol. That's Lucas right there. Just make sure you shut the door all the way. Okay. And the Marines guard the bases, and then they patrol, and you need more of them, and it's a slippery slope, literally, where the first Marine that hits the beach in Da Nang, which is where the first Marines go in 64, it's only a matter of time until it's the full in commitment, right? But by the end of Johnson's presidency, there are 500,000 American soldiers in Vietnam, right? And we've sustained thousands of casualties, right? It's Johnson sort of just ropes it in. It's like the proverbial toad in the pot, where you turn the water up a little bit at a time and it never even notices, right? I mean, it's just the American people just get used to hearing that slightly more people are being deployed to Vietnam all the time, right? But I mean, the Johnson administration just sort of escalates it, ratchets it up a little bit at a time. The commander is a guy, William Westmoreland, and Westmoreland becomes convinced that the way to defeat the insurgency in the South is simultaneously bomb the crap out of the North to sort of deter their support, and then fight them with overwhelming firepower, right? I mean, just anytime you meet these guys, just blow them up, right? And so if you're the infantryman in Vietnam, if you're a Marine rifleman or an Army guy, an Army infantryman, the standard thing that you do is you tromp around the jungle in Vietnam for weeks at a time, looking for some, contact with the South Vietnamese insurgents, who become known as they call themselves the NLF, the National Liberation Force. There's also occasionally the NVA, the North Vietnamese Army, but you call them, of course, Victor Charlie, VC, Vietnamese Communists, Viet Cong, or Charlie for short, right? I mean, VC, Victor Charlie, Viet Cong. And so you go looking for Charlie in the woods, and you march around all damn day in the rain and in the heat and in the jungle and the mud and the leeches. And sometimes you find him and there's a gunfight, and sometimes you just marched all the time, right? And it's this incredibly frustrating thing, right? And the Americans will get helicoptered in, they'll wander around for a while, they'll exchange gunfire, they helicopter out. And there's no sense that you're like, it's not like World War II where you're like conquering France and liberating it a mile at a time, right? Where you're pushing the enemy back, right? And it's this surreal thing. You live in a base in Da Nang, and you sit on China Beach on your days off, and you drink cold beer and eat ice cream. And then, a couple days a week, you get suited up in a helicopter and you fly out into the jungle. And you march around, and a couple guys get shot, and they get evacuated. You go back by helicopter, and that's it. And it's like not real, right? And the Johnson administration lies all the time about the Vietnam War too. They relentlessly create this upbeat narrative, that it's this sort of like everything's going great, and the rice harvest has been destroyed, and we're gonna, the dikes have been blown, all this sort of progress and metrics and numbers. And the reporters who poke around, and there's a lot of them, guys like Neil Sheehan and David Halberstam and whatever, they get to the point where they realize that, like, this is nonsense. It's just nuts. I mean, it's just, my father served in a hospital in Da Nang for a while, and he said, every month they got a Marine second lieutenant who had his butter bar, right? The little bar said he was a second lieutenant. And he would come wandering in with they call him a shaved tail because he had the high and tight haircut. And he'd come in and he'd say, we destroyed the North Vietnamese rice harvest this year. And so the North Vietnamese army is expected to starve. And as a consequence, we will win the war within the next 6 months. And when I said, like, the first time we were like, oh, shit, wrap this shit up real quick. And of course, like month 3, 4, 5, 6, we start laughing at the guy. He comes in, he's like, well, the North Vietnam, we were just like, shut the fuck up, right? I mean, like, we were on our elbows up to dead people and dying people every day. And the pronouncements of the American military, MACV is called Military Systems Command Vietnam. The pronouncements of MACV every day became sort of less and less attached to reality, right? And yet the Johnson administration persisted in this kind of relentlessly upbeat narrative. So the important moment is 1968. There's a big fight in the North Vietnamese government, right? Some factions in the North Vietnamese government desperately want to continue this sort of slow political strategy, destabilize the South, wear down its popular support, gradually increase the pressure on the South Vietnamese government.
It's fine. Keep going.
It's fine.
I don't know. Talk about getting off.
It's a little hard to stay focused with the panoplia. And so some factions in the North Vietnamese government, the Politburo, they want to pursue this kind of gradual, kind of slow strategy where they weaken and destabilize the South Vietnamese government. Some factions want to pursue, Giap is one of these guys, he wants to pursue this once in a lifetime kind of all-in grand offensive where they marshal all their resources, and in one decisive moment, they have the entirety of South Vietnam rise up in favor with them. They invade from North Vietnam into South Vietnam, and they just throw the Americans into the sea. They defeat them militarily on the ground in open battle. They just get them, right? And Jap supports this, right? He thinks they can do it. He thinks it's possible. So they do it. The South Vietnamese government, North Vietnamese government, is increasingly falling under the control of a very charismatic and talented and very intellectual guy named Le Duan. And Le Duan doesn't want to do this, but he also views this as an opportunity. If this works, it works. If it fails, then you have destroyed the credibility of your major rivals, Ho Chi Minh and Giap. Ho Chi Minh's getting pretty old. Giap is on the way out too. If he loses this, it'll end his career. So they agree. And the Vietnamese celebrate a Lunar New Year holiday every year called Tet. And Tet has traditionally been marked in Vietnamese culture with a big street fair. Everybody cooks like 100 pounds of food. Everybody eats all the food. There's a bunch of party, the dragon dance in the street. Everybody gets all happy. It's a fun time. And in Vietnam, during the 20th century, there had traditionally been a truce between the warring combatants during Tet. You didn't fight during Tet. And so in 1960, what's that? Like an arm. Everybody just kind of agreed in Tet, we're just going to not fight, right? It's like an armistice, yeah. And so in 1968, what happens is that the Johnson administration has spent the winter of 1967 to 8 talking about all the progress they made. The famous line, you can't help but quote, "There's a light at the end of the tunnel," right? We've crossed the divide. The South Vietnamese are going to win, and the North Vietnamese are on the run. I mean, it's going to be etched on Johnson's fucking tombstone. And so then comes Tet, late January 1968, and the whole country just goes fucking nuts. Now, all our attention has been focused on a base in the mountains in northwestern South Vietnam near the border called Khe Sanh. The North Vietnamese expertly dangle it in front of the South Vietnamese as a place where they're kind of hanging out, their dicks in the wind, proverbially. And so Johnson spends all of his time and effort supporting this offensive to destroy the Vietnamese near Khe Sanh. And he misses all the intelligence that says that the South Vietnamese are doing something else. And so the attack on Tet come as a huge surprise. And it's a couple things. The first is it's uprisings of the South Vietnamese insurgency all over South Vietnam, from Hue all the way down to Quang Tri and Chu Chi and all the way over South Vietnam, Saigon. There's insurgents in the streets, and then also it is an invasion of South Vietnam by the North Vietnamese regular army. You know, they come down across the border and they occupy the cities of Quang Tri and Hue. And so the Tet Offensive, you got to look at it in two ways. Militarily, it is a defeat for the Vietnamese, the North Vietnamese. The city of Hue is occupied by the North Vietnamese, and they not only get pushed out by the Marines, but also it is discovered when they leave that they have used the opportunity to occupy Hue to shoot anybody they don't like. An eerie preview of what is going to happen if Vietnam becomes communist, right? And they rounded up school teachers and political activists and lawyers and doctors and anybody they didn't like. They shot them and buried them in a mass grave in outside the city. And so we crushed them. Wherever the North Vietnamese reared their ugly head, the Marines and the Army got them. On the other hand, the media coverage of the war that was given to Americans was a sharp contrast to that. Instead, it sort of portrayed the war as a kind of complete fiasco. And you can understand why this is not a complete picture of the war, and yet it was impossible not to juxtapose it with the Johnson administration's previous statements about the war. Here's Johnson in January 1968 saying, well, you know, the light is at the end of the tunnel. And here he is 3 weeks later, and American soldiers are getting shot to death on the streets of Saigon, which is apparently full of communist soldiers or some bullshit. And the most iconic pictures is the South Vietnamese insurgency sent a bunch of guys to take over the American embassy, right? And they took over the American embassy, and they shot up the Great Seal of the United States, and they occupied the embassy, and eventually the Marines drove them out, but not before they burned a bunch of shit and shot everybody. And I mean, it was impossible to avoid the image of the cameras lingering on the shot up seal of the United States, right? We thought the Johnson administration had this shit under control, and yet there's this, right? And there's a really significant picture. It's the photographer's name is Eddie Adams. And he's on the street with a police chief, a South Vietnamese military police chief named Nguyen Nguyen Loan, right? And he's like a military police officer. And they bring him a guy. and they know his name. Derek can look him up. I don't remember his name, but they bring this guy. He's in civilian clothes. He's in a checkered shirt and a pair of khaki pants, and he's part of a South Vietnamese communist kill squad who's been sent to shoot police officers and their families. They caught him with blood on his hands. They caught him red-handed in a war zone, dressed in a civilian clothes with a gun. So they bring him up to Luan, and they say, "Look, Mr. Nguyen, we caught this guy who's been shooting police officers." And in front of Eddie Adams, Luan just nods, and he pulls out a little revolver, a little 32 caliber revolver, and he just shoots the guy in the head. And he just shoots him and kills him. And it was a really ugly image. Was Luan wrong to do what he did? Well, I mean, it's a war zone. You're marching around in civilian clothes with a rifle shooting cops and their families. You get what you get. Geneva Convention doesn't apply to civilians combatants. You got to wear a uniform. Yeah, what's his name?
Brigadier General Nguyen Yuapolo.
Right, that's the they know the name of the dude.
Oh, of the guy.
Yeah. Does it say? I have his name in a book somewhere. Yeah, I know his name in a book somewhere. And so, you know, on the one hand, what Nguyen Nguyen did was not unjustified. But for Americans watching this at home, it was kind of horrifying. I mean, here we are supposed to be the good guys defending democracy and stuff, and there's a guy, police officer, shooting a guy in the head in front of a cameraman. It's on the street. It was Nguyen Van Lem. Nguyen Belo. Belo was his nom de guerre, I guess. Yeah. And so Mr. Nguyen Van Lem, he just shot him. And if you Google it, if you Google police officer, Vietnamese police shooting a man, you can find the guy. And it's a really grim pit. The shit's been beaten out of him. He knows he's going to get shot in the face. And Luan just pulls out a pistol and just shoots him. And Eddie Adams, you know, Luan became reviled as a war criminal. And he ended up owning a 7-Eleven in South California. And Eddie Adams went to him years later and was like, "I'm sorry, I trashed your reputation. It was not, the one photograph I took was not representative of the big situation." And yet, for many Americans, you know, that was it. I mean, you watch the news coverage and you think, holy shit, we were supposed to be winning this war. And here we are getting our ass kicked. There's Vietnamese everywhere, right? I mean, holy shit. And there another picture we can mention was the girl running from a village. It was a young Vietnamese girl. She's naked. She's prepubescent. She's running down a road, and her village has been napalmed by South Vietnamese bombers because it was suspected of harboring North Vietnamese. And her clothes are on fire, and she's running down the road pulling her clothes off. And a lot of Americans saw this and thought, holy fuck, what the fuck are we doing to these people, right? I mean, we're not the good guy. We're blowing up villages full of innocent farmers, right? You got to understand, we've been wandering around Vietnam at this point for 5-6 years, shooting up the place, blowing stuff up, fighting this elusive enemy that doesn't wear uniforms. We don't know where he is. We don't know what's going on. And our soldiers, we get frustrated, right? I mean, you know, you're marching around, you're getting shot at all the time. You find a village. These people live like it's the Middle Ages. You think, God damn it, you know, these people support the communists. Their kids are joining the communists. They're hiding guns or whatever. And of course, the peasants mostly just want to get left alone. They don't give a shit. But you're there, and you give them a hard time. They give you lip. You beat up some of them. Ed Bradley, who was on CNN for many years, great African-American reporter, he watched the Americans pull out Zippos and torch the houses of the South Vietnamese farmers. And he asked them why, and they said they're probably communists anyway. And of course, he's like, well, they weren't communists yesterday. They are fucking going to be communists tomorrow when you burn their goddamn house down. The only thing they owned of value, these poor Vietnamese peasants, was a water buffalo to plow the rice field, and the Americans would use it for target practice out of helicopters. They'd shoot the water buffalo with rifles to watch it run. And the only thing that they own other than the water buffalo is this little piece of land that they farm rice on, and their ancestors are buried on it for 1,000 years. And a good Confucian Buddhist, you tend to graze your ancestors. And what we would do is we would drag them away to villages to protect them. And of course, they'd sneak out at night to go tend the graves of their ancestors because that's what you're supposed to do as a good person. And we just didn't get it. And what we did is we alienated all these people. Then the communists roll into town and say, look, you know, you may not like us, but we're not setting your shit on fire. We're not shooting your water buffalo. We're going to send guys to clean up your rice harvest and help you out because we give a shit about Vietnam. And at least the peasants say, well, I don't know about communism, but at least these fucking guys are Vietnamese. At least they look like us and talk like us, right? And so I think the most famous thing that happened in Tet all this news coverage got aired in America about how the fighting was incredible, the violence was tremendous. It was such a surprise. And Walter Cronkite comes on TV and he sort of says, I don't know what to say. I mean, the Johnson administration, I'm telling you what they say. And a couple weeks ago, they were telling me, and I'm telling you that we were winning the war, but I don't know. Maybe we're not. And Johnson, he said in the White House, he said, if I lost Walter Cronkite, I just lost Middle America, right? Nobody's gonna trust me then, right?
While you're
Yeah.
drinking, I'm muting you for a second. Stephanie wants to know why this war is not considered just as bad and violent as the 30 Years' War or
So did they hear what you said? I don't have to repeat it. Okay. I mean, Stephanie, the main thing I would say is that the 30 Years' War and World War II were more violent, just in scale. Like if you read about Vietnam, it's no less awful than either the 30 Years' War or World War II, with the exception, of course, of the Holocaust. Right? If you separate the conduct of World War II from the Nazis' atrocities that the war allowed to happen, war is war. It's all bad. But World War II and World 30 Years' War were bigger, and I think also they happened in Europe. It was just they were given more attention, right? Vietnam is different. It's the first TV war. There are TV cameras. You can see it happen. You can watch it. You can watch it happen. There's footage. There's film of these things going on, right? So that's different. There's photographs of World War II, but there's film of Vietnam. But in a way, in terms of what happened to the ordinary Vietnamese, the experience of an ordinary Vietnamese peasant caught between the South Vietnamese insurgents and the communists and the American military, the ARVN, it's not any different from a peasant in Franconia in 1635, right? I mean, it's not any different than what would happen if you were the mayor of a town in Germany when the mercenary army of Albrecht von Wallenstein wanders into your town and tells you that if you don't hand over 10 pretty girls and all of your money, they're going to burn your entire fucking town. Right? I mean, that's if you're a peasant in Vietnam, if you're the village hetman of a little village in South Vietnam, you have the same feeling when the Viet Cong march into your town and said, look, we're going to need 10 men to join our army and we're going to need all your rice or we're going to shoot everybody in the town, right? You know what that's like. And so the experience is pretty similar, I think, and it's just as brutal, right? And so the irony is the South Vietnamese were brutalized by the North in the name of liberating them from communism. And of course, the same thing happened. There's a famous incident where a reporter is watching an American commander order an artillery strike on a village. And he says, why are you attacking that village? And the American commander says, well, that village is suspected of supporting the South Vietnamese insurgents. And the reporter says, but you don't know for sure, right? And the guy says, yeah, but it's better to destroy it and prevent the North from using it if they're not already using it. And the guy says, but how do you explain it? He says, well, we had to destroy the village in order to save it. Right, which is for years when I talked to my mom about this, that would be the quote she'd say. We had to destroy the village in order to save it. Right, better to burn it down and make those people homeless so we can then help them and put them in a big city in a slum where they work for minimum wage in a shitty factory than allow them to be free on the off chance that they might, become supporters of the communists. Right. And the communists were just as brutal. They'd shoot anybody who got in their way, right? They ruled the night. The sun would go down. They'd come into your village and take what they want. They'd leave in the morning. And there wasn't a goddamn thing you do about it. And so I think it's, in many ways, it's just as bad. The problem is it's not as big. It's just the 30 Years' War is a bigger, more populated country. World War II is everywhere. It's just all over the world. You can't do about it. So anyway, I think that answers her question.
Yeah.
So what can we say about the Johnson administration? Well, of course, in 1968, it's a presidential election year. Johnson's up for re-election. Vietnam is on the ballot. That's it. It's the Great Society, which is great in many respects, but it's not, what anybody wants to talk about is Vietnam. And Johnson enters the New Hampshire primary and comes in like 12th out of 12, which for a sitting president is a humiliating rebuke. So he withdraws. And he gives the nomination up to the Wolves. He throws it up to the party. It's going to be a contested primary, right? And the front runner is not the vice president, Hubert Horatio Humphrey, the happy warrior from mayor of Minneapolis and longtime member of the House of Representatives. The front runner is Robert Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy, JFK's younger brother, the third in the four Kennedy brothers. Is Joe Jr. died in World War II. Is JFK shot in Texas, and it's Bobby Kennedy. His younger brother's Teddy Kennedy. And so in April of 1968, April 4th, 1968, Martin Luther King is shot in Memphis, Tennessee. And he's protesting garbage workers, the poor treatment. And you got to understand, in America, there's these fierce protests against the Vietnam War by 1968. Young people have become mobilized. The Johnson administration is lying, and there's all this mistrust, and it's really grim. And I don't remember if it's 1968. I think it's 1969. But the Pentagon commissioned a study of Vietnam back in like 1965, and a naval officer named Daniel Ellsberg participated in it. And Ellsberg, he went and he gathered a bunch of data, and he basically reported to the Pentagon and said, "We're getting our fucking ass kicked. The Vietnamese hate us. We're not winning the war. It's bullshit." And the study got buried. The Secretary of Defense, Robert McNamara, buried the whole thing. And Ellsberg decided to leak it. I want to say it was after the election. And it revealed what many people in America suspected, which is for years, the Johnson administration had straight up lied about the war. They had lied and given these optimistic updates about the war because they didn't want to admit that that we were losing, that they didn't have a handle on the war, right? And so, if you look at an activist, a Vietnam War activist in the '60s, practically every one of them started out as practically everyone started out as a civil rights activist. That was the on-ramp for everybody. It was you start out protesting civil rights, and the 1964 Civil Rights Act gets passed, the 1965 Voting Rights Act gets passed, and then you look around for other things and you think, holy shit, young people getting drafted all over the country, and they're going to go die in Vietnam, and the government's lying, and we're killing innocent people, and maybe the communists are just not so bad after all. And that's where all these people ended up, right? If you go talk to any of these guys, that's where they got started. So in 1960, well, I mean, like anybody. Well, I mean, yeah, shout out to your mom, who was activated, was mobilized by the civil rights movement, and then also ended up opposing the Vietnam War. Yeah, and I mean, she's representative of most young people in the '60s who really, if you were born in the '50s, you grew up listening about the civil rights movement and its triumphs. You watched them unfold in real time, and then when you yourself decided that you had to find an issue that was worthy of your attention, you thought, well, man, Vietnam, that's it, right? My mom was working in the naval hospital, and she said that if the corpsmen who were in med school, if they got drafted, they were deferred as long as they got good grades, and as soon as one of them failed one of his classes, he'd be gone. You'd come back next semester. Where's Bob? Bob failed chemistry, so his ass is in Vietnam. His student deferment didn't cover him when his GPA went below 2.9 or whatever. And it was easy to say, like, this is affecting everybody, right? The civil rights movement was about racism in the South, even though there's not. Of course, there's racism in the North too. But I mean, segregation is in Alabama, but you could march against Vietnam in anywhere, right? I mean, kids in your neighborhood who get drafted and go out there and get their ass killed, right? And so what happened on April 4th is Martin Luther King's in Memphis, Tennessee. He's protesting garbage workers being treated terribly, and he's on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel, and James Earl Ray shoots him in the head and kills him, and just kills him on the steps of the balcony. And every place goes, the black people just go nuts. I mean, this is just, I mean, what is there to do? Well, it's this sort of nihilistic argument of like, well, I guess that's just, whatever. And the only place where there's not a big riot is Indianapolis, because in Indianapolis, the mayor embargoed the news. I'm just gonna kill them both.
No, you're not.
They just won't give me a minute's peace.
Hey, girls, you need to be quiet.
Go upstairs.
No. Imagine being able to just say no. Hey, did she just come in and yell something at us?
Forts.
Forts. All right.
I heard
Whatever.
farts.
I don't even know what I heard. And so, anyway, the mayor of Indianapolis embargoed the news because Senator Robert Kennedy was going to go speak in Indianapolis. And there's a video of it. He goes into town, and they tell him They're like, you know, you don't have to go in because the town, they don't know the king has been shot, right? They couldn't do this today, of course, it's social media. But Kennedy's like, they don't know? And so he ditches his prepared speech and he gives a speech. You can watch it, it's on video. It's on YouTube. And he says, you know, my brother, Martin Luther King got shot. And he said, my brother got shot by a white man. So I know what you're feeling. I know how this is. But we can't let hatred, you know, be the order of the day. We've got to work to build a better country. It's a really good speech. I don't want to misquote him, so watch it on YouTube. And it's a presidential speech. I mean, if you're watching this shit, you think this fucking guy is gonna go the distance. So a couple weeks later, Kennedy wins. It's like July. He wins the California primary. This is it. Kennedy's gonna be the presidential nominee. He's gonna be president in 1968. He's in the ballroom of a hotel in California. He gives a big speech accepting the nomination. He walks into the kitchen, and a Palestinian gunman named Sirhan shoots him and kills him. Empties a .38 caliber revolver into him, kills him. And it's like, you know, what the fuck? I mean, the bottom just kind of falls out, right? And so the Republicans nominate former Vice President, longtime presidential aspirant Richard Nixon, right, who runs this really nihilistic campaign. He sort of pitches it to Kevin Phillips, one of his campaign strategists, even writes a memo called the Southern Strategy, where he says basically that the Democratic Party's support for civil rights and the empowerment of black voters has given the Republicans an opening. For the first time in the history of the party, white conservative Southern Democrats might be convinced to vote Republican if you can convince them that you support opposition to the civil rights movement, right? I mean, and you can't just say we don't support civil rights. You've got to say something else. You've got to say something else.
You're just gonna chug it?
Oh, there's a lot of this left. I thought there was less than there was. We're not, Sarah. We're not drinking. This is not creamer. It's cocktail that we pre-mixed. Okay. I don't even want to know what the fuck's going on in there.
Scissors and hose.
Oh boy.
Hose and hose.
I don't care. I don't make the scissors.
Somebody's got some sass. Somebody needs to get jacked up, is what I'm saying.
You?
I don't have any sass. What's up? Just jacking it. Just gonna establish something.
No.
What? Hawk must not be watching because he would have.
No, actually, I don't think he is.
It's a shame. It's a shame. Probably hanging out
We
with
don't have a few of our regulars.
his girlfriend. Yeah, we don't have Evan. Evan has been making snarky comments this whole time. So, yeah, I don't have a message from Hawk. Man, rude.
There you get some.
I mean, probably not. What? Probably not, though. It's cool. Okay, get out. Come on. Go play. Go play. You need someone to help you with the Cat Funhouse box? The fuck is that? Go.
That's why they had the scissors that I took away.
Just go in the. Come on.
Why do you keep stretching your skirt up like that?
I'm gonna jack you up. I swear to God. What are you doing? Why? What is this happening? All right. So, anyway, come on. And so, you know, at the Democratic convention in '68, Humphrey wins the nomination, but not without this ugly confrontation between anti-Vietnam War activists who were angry at his support for the Johnson administration's Vietnam policy, and establishment Democrats who are angry that anti-Vietnam War activists will deprive them of the presidency, basically. And it plays out in front of the cameras. I mean, the police come into Lincoln Park, I think it is, or Grant Park, and they beat the shit out of these protesters. Of course, the protesters throw bags of urine at them. Off camera. Yeah, they were peeing in plastic bags and flinging them at the cops, and then the cameras rolled long enough to see the cops beat these guys to hell. And it was just chaos. It was tear gas in the streets and stuff. And Humphrey took the stage to denounce the Gestapo tactics of Chicago Mayor Richard Daley And Richard Daley was on camera long enough for people to hear him call, to see him call Humphrey. It was Ribicoff, I think, was the guy who took the stage to come with the Gestapo tactics. And Daley cuts, the camera cuts to Daley, Richard Daley, Chicago mayor, and he calls the speaker. I think it was Abraham Ribicoff. He says, "You goddamn Jew motherfucker," and then they cut away. And I mean, it's, if you're Nixon, this is just like, this is the greatest moment. The Republicans are watching the Democrats literally tear themselves to pieces. So Nixon wins in 1968. Nixon becomes president, right? Vice president in 1952 and 56. Lost 1960 to Kennedy by a hair, right? By a hair. And Nixon wins, and he wins on this law and order platform, right? I mean, and law and order is code for civil rights are bad, right? I mean, it's like it's like the pollster would say many years later, Lee Atwater, he'd say, you know, in the '60s you'd start out saying N-word, 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 and you can't say that. There's a point where you can't say it, so you say instead law and order, which is code for no civil rights. And then after that, you're saying things like busing and forced busing, which is code. But you're still saying, you're still talking to the segregationists. You just can't say segregation. You got to say something else. You got to say a code, right? And Nixon wins on this platform. And to be totally fair to Nixon, he wins on ending the Vietnam War. I mean, that's one of the big policy platforms he wins. So Nixon comes up with a plan to end it. And we got to mention two things. The first thing Nixon does is during the 1968 election, there have been peace talks ongoing with the Vietnamese in Paris for a long time. It's the North Vietnamese, the South Vietnamese, and the Americans and the French brokering the deal, the Paris Peace Accords. And Nixon commits treason. Nixon, through a back channel contact he has, he approaches the North Vietnamese. The back channel contact is a woman named Anna Chennault. Back in World War II, before we officially were at war with the Japanese, we sent guys to China to fight on behalf of the Chinese government and fight the Japanese, and it couldn't be official. So they're flying tigers. There's a bunch of airplane dudes, and one of them was a pilots, I guess. One of them was this square-jawed, handsome fella named Claire Chennault. And so he married a lady, Anna Chennault, right? So Nixon approaches Anna Chennault, and he basically says, look, I'm not saying this, but I am saying it. And if you go to the North Vietnamese and you tell them to tank the Paris Peace Accords long enough for me to humiliate Johnson and win the 1968 election, then I'll give you a better deal. You'll get better out of me than you'd have got out of Johnson. And so Nixon committed, treason. He gave aid and comfort to the enemies of the United States for political gain. Nobody knew about it for decades, but he did. Anna Chennault conveyed the message, and the North Vietnamese stopped the talks. They walked out. It humiliated Johnson. It closed off the possibility of a peace deal. And Nixon restarted the talks after he won. So Nixon's a real piece of shit. Right? It's hard to imagine a guy that would do that. Imagine if you ran for president against like Barack Obama and you negotiated with ISIS and you said, if you do something real bad during the election to humiliate Obama and he loses and I win, I'll give you a better deal. I'll go easier on you than he would have. That's what Nixon did. And so Nixon announces a plan called Vietnamization. And the plan is basically to turn over the Vietnam War to the Vietnamese so that we don't have to die fighting the war that they don't really want to fight. And if you've been following along, you'd say to yourself, well, shit, weren't we Vietnamizing the war in the Kennedy administration? And the whole friggin' problem was that they didn't seem to really want to friggin' fight it, and we had to go in there and do it ourselves? And the answer is yes. But the difference between 1962 and 3 and 1969 and 1970 is that the American people have given a shit about Vietnam, right? I mean, oh, what a difference 50,000 casualties in 5 years of horrible fighting will make. And so by 1969 and 70 and 71, the Americans don't want to, we don't want to deal with it anymore. And so when Nixon presents Vietnamization, instead of seeming like a completely bullshit fig leaf to just cover the proverbial penis and testicles of the Greek statue, not really, everybody knows what's there. You just got to come up with something to cover it, right? Instead of seeming like bullshit, it seems like a real plan. And so that's what Nixon does. We bombed Cambodia in secret for years to try to sever the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Nixon illegally did it and it didn't work. We invaded Cambodia as a fucking fiasco. The South Vietnamese army crossed the border into Cambodia and then turned right the fuck around and walked right the fuck back. But that was what gave Nixon the cover to say enough is enough, right? And he pursued a strategy where gradually we just lessened the American commitment. We just emotionally, materially, physically, militarily distance ourselves from South Vietnam. And by 1974, we were out. We left. We just walked away, right? And of course, morale in the American army plummeted. Does anybody want to be the last guy to die in Vietnam? Of course not. As soon as you know the American government is pulling men out, everybody just gave up, right? Yeah.
Stephanie wants to talk about Jane Fonda.
Yeah, well, Jane Fonda, she did go over to Vietnam, right? And she was one of the many student activists who were really passionately opposed to the war. Now, what Jane Fonda did is she went over there to North Vietnam. She probably went, I don't know where the fuck you'd go. You'd go somewhere third party and then you'd get a plane to North Vietnam. I don't know how you'd do it. But she went over there and she did a whole propaganda thing about it. And then the moment you can see is they took her and they put her on a they were singing songs and they taught her a patriotic song in Vietnamese and she's singing it with them. And she's famous. Henry Fonda's her dad. She's a movie star, right? Not yet. That's the 80s. That's the 80s, baby. My mom had those. My mom had them and she wouldn't let my dad know she had them because he would have thrown them out. I'd have thrown them out too if I knew. And she's up there doing this whole propaganda song and they teach her a Vietnamese song. And she's so happy because she's like, these are regular people and they just want to be free and they're just trying to be, we're just blowing up their country or whatever. And they take her to some place. And she said before she knew what was happening, they sat her down, popped a helmet on her head, and they start singing a song and she's clapping and she's taking a picture and it's an anti-aircraft gun. And I mean, like, this is like, we didn't go to war with the North Vietnamese directly because we were worried that the if we went to war with the North Vietnamese, the Chinese would get involved, right? I mean, it's like Korea, right? If we invade North Vietnam, the Chinese would invade, and it's World War III with nukes and shit. And so we were very cautious about what we did with North Vietnam, but we did bomb North Vietnam, and they did shoot down our planes, right? I mean, guys like John McCain got shot down in North Vietnam. He got shot down and landed in a lake, and he broke his collarbone, and they fucked him up with a bayonet. And they took his ass to prison for like 5 or 6 years or something. And John McCain, before he died, he couldn't touch his own head because his collarbones grew back. They fused wrong. They were never set. And he couldn't comb his own hair for like 45 years. And so 50 years. And so Fonda's got a picture taken sitting on one of these gun emplacements, right? I mean, this gun could have been used to shoot down an American. Your kid could have died in Vietnam because of that goddamn gun, and then this stupid lady's sitting on. And so I appreciate that Jane Fonda thought that what she was trying to do was end a war that was needlessly killing innocent people, right? Civilians and stuff. It didn't need to happen. But for an American to do that, to allow, and she allowed herself to be used as a propaganda prop by the North Vietnamese government. I mean, it's like going to Nazi Germany and letting Hitler have a picture taken, shaking your hand, and put it in an American newspaper. It's crazy. And Fonda apologized for it, of course, when it became a thing that detrimentally impacted her ability to get work. When it became a thing that made it problematic for her Hollywood studios to employ her, she came out with a whole, I shouldn't have done it. But even in the 60s, you could oppose the Vietnam War while at the same time recognizing that the North Vietnamese government was a brutal communist regime that didn't tolerate political dissent. You could be sympathetic to the victims of the war without necessarily wanting to support the bad guy. And yet, for many young people, communism was given this certain moral luster by virtue of its opposition to what they presumed was the evil imperialist aggression of the United States, right? And so, we got an issue. We'll get the sticker. We'll get it. I know. And so, I mean, Fonda, you can say a lot of things about Jane Fonda. The best thing I say about her is she's just a naive idiot, right? I mean, you don't have to be a genius to realize communism's fucking terrible, but she wasn't even that smart. But you can sympathize with her in the sense that the Vietnam War was terrible. Innocent American men got drafted and got killed over there. South Vietnamese and North Vietnamese civilians died in the thousands. North Vietnamese soldiers, they died too. And so you can be sympathetic to the idea that this horrible war went on because nobody was brave enough to stop it. And that's, I think, why Jane Fonda found herself on an artillery piece, AAA anti-aircraft artillery in North Vietnam. But of course, she's stupid to have let herself get used as a prop, right? I mean, she's dumb to have let herself get used as a stooge, right? But I don't like Jane Fonda. I don't watch Jane Fonda movie. I won't watch a movie Jane Fonda's in. I don't. I think that yeah, I can understand why she did it, but at the same time, I never thought communism was anything other than the worst fucking thing in the world. So I don't need to be a genius to, I can protest the Vietnam War in America.
Communism as a theory is fine. It's the people who practice communism that
Well, I
should be
mean,
bad.
where in the hell's communism ever been anything other than a shit show?
But that's because of greedy people.
Well, yeah. But of course, the failure of communism is to understand that people are greedy, right? If everybody's greedy all the time, then your theory doesn't work, right? Anyway, but the Jane Fonda is just a naive young lady. She's a fool, right? She's not evil. She's just a fool. Of course, doesn't mean I have to like her. And so, we had all of that shit. So what did Nixon do? To make a long story short, because I know we've gone on for a while. What did Nixon do? Well, I mean, he basically just withdrew America from the Vietnam War an inch at a time until we were out, until we were done. And on the one hand, Nixon got the war. He ended the war, and Henry Kissinger, his Secretary of State, National Security Advisor, got the Nobel Peace Prize. Le Docteau, it was Pham Van Dong, as the North Vietnamese minister or foreign minister. He got offered to share the Nobel Peace Prize with Henry Kissinger, and he famously said, "The war in my country has not ended, and I can't take a peace prize until my country is at peace." Henry Kissinger, if you give Henry Kissinger the award, he'd run through a mile of fucking snow, right? So he showed up in Oslo to get the shit out of his prize. Le Docteau didn't do it. And so Nixon got reelected in 74 by A, cheating, and B, giving America what it wanted, an end to the Vietnam War. And we should mention a year later, the North Vietnamese army attacks South Vietnam as a spring offensive. And they're probing. They're just kind of, now that the Americans have gone, are the South Vietnamese going to fight back, And they don't. They fold like a wet rag. The South Vietnamese aren't going to fucking fight for this corrupt ass government. They don't have anything to believe in. And so the North Vietnamese commanders actually radio back and they say, we're going to win. And then the North Vietnamese government says, keep going. And everybody in America gets to watch this TV footage of the North Vietnamese tanks bursting through the presidential palace of South Vietnam and Saigon. And there's a picture you can show of the tank, and you can't see the flower garlands around the neck of the tank crew, where the South Vietnamese civilians have thrown flowers at the communists. You're going to save us from the tyrannical government, right? You're going to liberate us. And there's a famous picture of the last helicopter to leave the CIA station, the embassy, and it's crowded full of people trying to get away, American contractors and civilians, South Vietnamese who work for the government, or women who've had kids with Americans. And there's a picture I got in a book, and it's the CIA station chief, and he's punching a Vietnamese guy to keep him off of the chopper so that it can lift off, right? And all these people try to flee because they know that if the South Vietnamese government falls, they're going to get killed by the communists, which they did. Thousands of people died. And some of these dudes, they took helicopters and they flew them to American naval carriers, and we wouldn't let them land, so they crashed in the ocean. And when they were in the ocean, the Navy saved them because it's a man overboard, right? They wouldn't let you land, but they would save you if you crashed. Thousands of people took thousands of people. They built these boats and they sailed all over the South Pacific, called them boat people, for years, trying to find refuge in some country that would take them, Indonesia, the Philippines, whatever, to get away from the North Vietnamese communists who took over. And it was really sad. The fall of South Vietnam, I mean, nobody loved the government, but nobody wanted its replacement. And what did the North Vietnamese do when they took over? They shot everybody who didn't fall in line, right? And it's still a dictatorship today. The North Vietnamese Communist Party, the Indo-Chinese Communist Party, still runs the country with an iron fist. Giap, the general, lived for many years and was very critical of the communist government's handling of the economy and of society. He said, "I didn't fight for a tyranny. I fought for people to be free." And they put his ass under house arrest and shut him the fuck up. I have a biography of him where the author wrote him letters, and he wrote back. And after the third letter, the government didn't want him talking to somebody, so they shut him up. Right? They shut him the heck up. And Ho Chi Minh died before the war was over. So when they liberated Saigon in '75, they renamed it Ho Chi Minh City, which is still called today. Right? And a lot of Vietnamese people fled the country because their country was gone. Right? And so was Vietnam a mistake? I mean, we lost, right? As long as we were there, we won. But when we left, we lost, right? The North Vietnamese communists, they won the war. They turned Vietnam into a unified country, communist country. It didn't do what we thought. The big argument that going back to Eisenhower was that if communism took over Vietnam, it would spread like a domino. It would knock another domino. Thailand, Laos, Cambodia. Olivia, can you just give us a minute? It's a whole thing. And as it turned out, communism didn't spread to anywhere. Cambodia became communist, I should say. And the communist movement in Cambodia, the Khmer Rouge, was so bad, they mostly specialized in mass murdering individual communist Cambodians, right? But it didn't, like, nobody in Thailand or Taiwan or Indonesia or Malaysia or anybody else necessarily became communist, right? It turned out that the Vietnamese Communist Party was, as much as it was communist, it was also Vietnamese, right? And so the tragedy in Vietnam spread to Cambodia, but at the same time, it was also kind of Vietnamese, right? And we should mention, by the way, the Vietnamese became independent, and they were fiercely independent. China invaded Vietnam in the '70s to kind of bring the Vietnamese in line with their own goals, and the Vietnamese kicked their ass. Can't hear. Whatever. Yeah, there it is. It's a fang hair. And the Vietnamese kicked their ass. They let the Chinese army come into a valley in Vietnam, and they crushed it. And so they're still fiercely communist today, although, of course, that communism has become moderated by a certain love for capitalism on account of how capitalism is actually a good system of economics and communism is not. Hey, capitalism has problems, but it ain't fucking communism.
Yeah, but is it a good system?
Well, I mean, look, when your alternatives are communism and capitalism, what you're talking about is might work capitalism and have some problems capitalism, or it's like punching yourself in the face with a rusty knife 1,000 times communism. So there's a real clear choice, right? The rusty knife, whatever's better than that, is not perfect, but it ain't the rusty knife. You know what I mean? And so, hey, it's remember what Deng Xiaoping said in the '80s when he went to Shenzhen? He said, it doesn't matter if the cat is black or the cat is white. It only matters if the cat catches mice. That's all. And that's capitalism for you, right? And so it's a tragedy, right? 500,000 Americans were deployed per year in Vietnam by the end. And 50,000 Americans died. Millions of South Vietnamese and North Vietnamese civilians and soldiers died, right? It was impossible to think of it as anything other than a tragedy, right? And yet it was what it was, right? It was, in many ways, it was a huge moment for America. We lost a war, right? But only because we left, right? People were always able to argue on the right, for example, that we only lost because we left. Although, of course, people on the left argued that we had tarnished our image by supporting such a government. And the other countries, the Germans, for example, we supported Vietnam because we thought we can't back out of Vietnam because people wouldn't believe we would support them. And of course, the Germans thought, Jesus, do you think we're so stupid as to think that if you left Vietnam, a losing war, you wouldn't support Germany? I mean, those are not the same thing, right? I mean, we were convinced that if we backed out of Vietnam, NATO wouldn't believe we would support them. And of course, everyone in NATO thought, no, we can understand why you would back out of a peripheral commitment to preserve your primary commitment, right? I mean, they're not the same thing at all, right? But we were convinced that America supporting anyone anywhere meant that we had to support everyone everywhere, no matter what the cost, right? And the mistake also was the Vietnamese communists were communists, yes, but they were also Vietnamese, right? The myth of this transnational communist movement really was never, it never really was. Right? Even the Chinese and the Russians fought each other. They hated each other more than anything. As communist as they were, they still fought. And so Vietnam, I think, was a consequence of our own limited perceptions, right? And it led us to a path where we couldn't escape, where fighting was the only choice, right? So anyway, we got questions in the comments.
Not specifically questions. There's some fan appreciation.
Right.
Any questions you about red hot needles right in your eyeball?
Isaac Newton, maybe. We need to learn how optics work.
And my mother mentioned her MIA bracelet that
Yeah, she wore one for a long time. 69. Yeah, got shot down. Probably. I don't know. I don't know if he was. I don't know if he, I'd love to know if she knows whether he was like Air Force or whatever.
Probably does. She's got an etching from
the wall. Yeah. Yeah, my mom knows people that when we went a few years ago, she looked the dudes up because they have the little books of laminated names where you can look a guy up alphabetically and find out where he is on the wall, like they have by panel. You can look like John Smith, and you can like, oh, panel 3, and you go to panel 3. And she's like, she got me to look up a couple dudes, and she's like, yeah, I went to school with that guy, and I knew that guy, and I knew that guy. And so I mean, yeah, it's real. And I think the Vietnam War memorial is telling because when Mile In built it, it's not a triumphal memorial about how we kicked ass. They added a statue to it at the end. What it really is a memorial of all the guys that died, all the people and there's some women who died, right? His Air Force, yeah, he got his ass shot down over North Vietnam, yeah, which is shitty. Probably died in the crash or died in a PW camp, and it's telling that the monument isn't to like a soldier. It's sort of like this is the cost of the war, right? These are the people that didn't get to come home because of what happened, right? It's not like World War II.
I'd say wrap it up. Going at 2 hours. And
All right.
Girls are getting super
All right.
cranky. Don't walk away.
I'm gonna Fang it. Come on, Fang. Come on, this week. Jeez. Okay. Yeah. So I mean, we talked about Vietnam for a while. If there's questions, I'll answer a question. All right. All right. I think we can wrap it up. As always, am I still on? Are we still on? Like, comment, and subscribe. Hit up the YouTube channel if you want to. Comment any topics you want to hear about. We got a whole bunch. We got to go back and comb the comments for. I was thinking of what we might do. Okay, well, one of these weeks, what we might do is a little like a grab bag of little short 20-minute things about about a bunch of topics that people have mentioned that we want to have. So we might do like a bunch of short little topics. My executive producer has an idea she wants to talk about, but so we're thinking about that. So if you got a comment, if you got a topic you want to talk about, let us know. Otherwise, you can check us out on Patreon. You can subscribe. You can support us. Like, comment, and subscribe on the Facebook and the YouTube channel. And always, thanks for being here with us. We appreciate it very much.